Hello, and welcome to the sideboard. I am Emma Handy here with Drake Sasser talking about a little bit of something that's near and dear to my heart that you've brought for Legacy this weekend here at the Star City Games Players Championship. So, Drake, tell me a little bit about this Izzet Delver deck that you have chosen to bring.
Sure. So Izzet Delver is a much more traditional take on the Delver decks, like the Teamer Delver decks of old back with Ren and 6 were much more mid-rangey. This is a much more like tempo-based Delver deck, like much where you see traditional Delver, right? Like you got bolts, bolt them out, because you're blue-red. You got, you're maxed out on dazes, you got spell pierces, more than, just 4 force wills, you got a force negation too. Just much more low to the ground, trying to get your opponent dead while interacting a little bit. So
sure, you love to see it.
Oh, do love to see it.
Let's go ahead and get on to the beginning of the creature suite. Delver, decks named after it. Not that surprising. I see you've decided to go with the full playset of Dreadhorde Arcanist this weekend. Talk to me a little bit about that.
So most lists you see shave back a little bit on Arcanist. This is one of the only card advantage centric things going on in this Delver deck, but it is a fairly free inclusion to your deck that can still be aggressive when paired with lightning bolts, right? So, if you make a turn where you bolt and then flash back the bolt. It's 6 extra damage coming across. It's more than just the one. But you also can play the angle with cantrips where you turn it into a pseudo 2-mana Jace the Mind Sculptor that's just brainstorming every turn or pondering every turn. I think it's the most powerful card the deck has to offer, on its own. Just when you put it into play on turn 2, it's kind of like a Dark Confidant, right? Where it's just you need to answer this or it's going to drown you in card advantage. And so just very free little juke from the normal tempo plan the deck has to offer. And so I thought maxing out on it made a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely checks out, right?
Yeah.
True Name Nemesis, not super surprising. I see you've decided to go with 2 copies of it this weekend. That seems kind of stock.
Yeah, normally, you see between 2 and 3. I considered even cutting down to 1. I don't think the card's actually going to be very good this weekend. I think it's a necessary threat for this deck, but I expect a lot of main deck Pyroblasts and stuff like that, hedging for a bunch of blue mirrors, and the card's really bad in the face of that. And it's also very bad against Plague Engineer, which, that card's stock is going to go up because people think they're going to be able to play D&T again and stuff like that. And so all of the black decks probably going to have access to Plague Engineer, which True Name lines up very badly against.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. And here, rounding out the creature lineup, we have Young Pyromancer. I see you've decided to go with 3 copies of that card. Do you want to talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, it's very stock, but it is the next best 2-mana spell beyond Arcanist, in my opinion. It did kind of get unbanned, right, with Ren and 6's banning. This card was embarrassing when you just got renned down. It was just absolutely horrible for you. And there is still Plague Engineer that is consideration, but you can either clean up the Young Pyromancer or the Elementals with a Plague Engineer, so it lines up better than it looks on the surface. Still, like I said, one of your best 2-mana threats that you can have access to. They've played it since even back in the Deathrite Shaman days, so, pretty stock number on it. Like the card a lot.
Yeah, it gives the deck an interesting angle where you get to develop this 2-drop that says "kill me now" or it's gonna run away.
Exactly. Another angle from Arcanist too, where Arcanist is card advantage. This is going wide.
Sure, absolutely. Brainstorm, pretty typical. It's a Delver deck.
Gonna play 4.
Almost call it Izzet Brainstorm, right?
Yeah, one of your best Brainstorm decks because it helps you flip Delvers. So I've heard in the past, as Delver is a fair deck, that it is the best Brainstorm deck.
Oh yeah, every deck's the best Brainstorm deck a little bit because they all get to play Brainstorm.
Sure, exactly, correct.
All right, so Chain Lightning, this is one that is pretty specific to the Izzet Delver deck rather than any of the other ones. Is there a reason, is this kind of the reason that you leaned into the deck?
So it's not, Chain Lightning by itself is not really a reason to lean into this deck. It is kind of a symptom of the fact that you're in 2 colors. Your removal spell options aren't as good as if you were in Bug colors, for instance, right? Where you get all the good 2-mana removal spells, Replicate, stuff like that. This is a product of wanting more removal spells than just the 4 Lightning Bolts, which you'll see in a moment, I'm sure. And so you kind of let you play 6 Lightning Bolts. Chain Lightning is a lot worse if you face a red deck that can fire it back at something. That's embarrassing. But it is good enough, like I said, with Arcanist, where you can really make your Arcanist, race. You can make it an actual real threat. And of course, like I said, spots where you D&T, where you want more 1-mana removal spells, Chain Lightning is just kind of the best thing that you have access to.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. So here we kind of have the permission suite, or most of it at least. You got your typical days, Force of Will, Force of Negation. Is there something that kind of led you to leaning into having main deck copies of, or a main deck copy of Force of Negation?
So actually with the forces especially, there's something a little interesting going on with this tournament, right? Where I'm expecting a lot of fair matchups where Force of Will isn't as good, especially now that people are main decking things like Veil of Summer. So Force of Will, you used to leave them in a lot of the time, as of this year in Delver Mirrors. It's gone back and forth through the years, but the resolving your threat with Force Backup has been relevant enough in past years that you'd want to max out on it. But in this tournament, you're a little incentivized to pull back. You have Pyroblast in the main deck, you have Veil of Summers in the main deck, all of which line up really badly against Force effects. But I think with Izzet Delver, it's good enough, especially against like Harlan, Zach playing Terminus. Like you need to have a hard counter spell for free for these like very heavy impact sweepers. And if it gets veiled, I'm just going to be in a lot of trouble. Like that's the setups that I'm not really going to be able to win. I think it's important enough in this deck where we're being aggressive, we're trying to be mana efficient, that I max out on forces, even though they're not as good as they like would otherwise be.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned Zach and Harlan's deck. Does that mean that you're leaning into forces here as a bit more of a meta call?
Well, I worked with Zach and Harlan. I knew they were on Terminus. There's a lot of hype around the Oko decks from GP Barcelona. There was the Oko decks performed very well. And so it's very natural for those decks to pick up things like Astrolabe and Sweepers. Like I expected some Verdicts as well. The Forces worse against Verdict, but notably. But it is still good against some of like the key removal spells, like a key source of Plowshares on your Arcanist. You can immediately get that card advantage back through like flashing back cantrips, right?
Sure.
So if you can just begin to like force their removal spell for your Arcanist, you can begin to run away with the game. And that makes Force of Will kind of free-ish on both cards and mana in those cases. And I think, like I said, that makes it good enough in spots where you just need to like punk them out, right? Like you need them not to have everything or you're going to lose.
Yeah, absolutely. Helps you stay ahead. Makes a lot of sense to me. Moving on here, we see the rest of your removal suite, Lightning Bolt, Magmatic Sinkhole. What's got Sinkhole in your deck?
Sinkhole was kind of like a hedge for Tarmogoyfs. You don't see a lot of them, like flipping the deck list, didn't see a lot of them. But once again, I think there was a Tarmogoyf deck that won GP Barcelona. And then there was like a green deck in second place. So like it's like bigger green creatures, things like Questing Beast, things that don't die to the bolt effects. I wanted an out. I wanted some kind of answer. It's a little awkward having a delve spell that has tension with your Dreadhorde Arcanists because you're trying to flashback spells with your Arcanists. You also have this, but if you have Arcanists going, hopefully you're a little ahead already.
You'll figure it
out. There is a little bit of tension going on there where your graveyard may not have enough cards in it. But I think this card is one of the biggest like cards that Blue Red Delver got recently because having an answer in just red that answers both Planeswalkers and Tarmogoyfs is really, really attractive. So it's a hedge for Tarmogoyfs more than anything else, though, honestly.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. So on this slide, we have Ponder, and on the next slide, we also have 2 copies of Preordain that round out the rest of your cantrip suite. Is that you leading into Preordain? Is that sort of a choice where your deck just needs a bit more velocity, or are you trying to make your sideboard cards a little better? What led to you including the extra cantrips?
So once again, in blue-red, when you're constricting your color options, you have less total like powerful options. So like I want to be able to find my key lightning bolts a little bit easier. I want to be able to find my key threats a little bit easier. So upping the cantrip density makes a little bit of sense there, even though they're tempo negative. And also you need your Dreadhorde Arcanists to have a cantrip to flashback.
Oh, sure,
so it's very important to have a critical mass of cantrips. In this case, I have 10 to make sure that your Arcanist actually is card advantage when it lives, right? So that's more why I went a little heavier in Preordain. I mean, there's an argument for me I should have played more, but that was, I think, the minimum I could reasonably play and have my Dragon Arcanist be very good.
Yeah, Arcanist, Young Pyromancer, you have all these cards that kind of just want you to spin your wheels a bunch.
Exactly.
So it really is heads up to just include the Preordains here. We have Pyroblast, Spell Pierce that kind of finishes out your interactive suite. You mentioned before seeing a lot of value in main deck Pyroblast right now.
Right. So if people are playing Okos, one of the best things you can do against Oko is Pyroblast it, right?
Yeah.
It's a very efficient trade. You can hold up multiple counter spells at the same turn. It can also be a removal spell for Oko after it's already resolved, whereas that's very hard for Delver to deal with, right? If you're bolting down Oko, you're not in a good spot. That's a lot of bolts.
6 loyalty?
Yeah, that's a lot.
So many fingers.
So having just like an answer, also Icefang Quaddle, card that's picked up a lot in the Oko style decks, cleanly answers that when it's coming down at instant speed. And once again, kind of good with Arcanist. You can move, like if there's an Icefang Quaddle in play, you can move it out of the way with using Pyroblast as a removal spell, flashing back Pyroblast with Arcanist. So like it does play well with a lot of the other cards, plays well with Young Pyromancer, plays well with the Arcanist, and it's just, I expected a field of blue. It's one of the best answers you have for blues cards.
Yeah, absolutely. Historically, the Players' Championship is kind of skewed in the direction of blue, so
people
it makes
want
sense
to play their Brainstorms.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good card. Why wouldn't you want to play it?
Right, exactly. They figured it out.
All right, so fetch lands, nothing too shocking. You're playing blue cards. You want to get blue lands.
Split them so you don't get needled. everything makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Nothing too shocking here. 4 Scalding Tarn, 3 Volcanic Island, a set of Wastelands. I see you've leaned more into the Wasteland side of things than the Price of Progress side of things.
Yeah. Wasteland kind of unbanned again with Ren and 6. Like, unless you're playing Ren and 6 in the same deck, like being able to just value Wasteland people makes a lot of sense. I expected like a potential for lands. There's a couple of players that have some experience with that, and I definitely expected Dilks to be on depths in this tournament. You know, makes a lot of sense to max out on Wastelands. Sure. Also, just very good with the main Delver plan.
So here's something that's a bit of a talking point that's a draw to Izzet Delver and kind of gives you points against other people's Wastelands is you actually get to play a ton of basic lands in your Delver strategy. Is that something that drew you to this deck at all? For sure,
yeah. I mean, that's one of my favorite parts of playing Blue-Red Delver, right, is you're a lot better in the Delver Mirror. If their lands are Wastelandable, yours aren't, you're going to have mana advantage all game, and that's how you win a Delver Mirror. Also very good against decks like lands. We talked about, like I think there's some players that had lands experience in this tournament. Playing basics really attractive for that. I don't want to be playing some kind of fair deck and getting wastelanded into the ground. And it also, as you'll see in a bit, it lets me leverage Blood Moon in my sideboard. So like there's a lot of reasons, there's a lot of ways this deck can use basics to its advantage, and like that really pays you off for playing basics, not playing those more colors and playing better spells like we were talking about the whole time. I have to make a few worse deck building decisions with like my removal spells and my threats, but you really get paid off with a more powerful mana base.
Okay, well, you mentioned Blood Moon in your sideboard. Let's go ahead and take a look at that.
There it is.
Now.
Look at it. Beautiful.
Blood Moon, front and center of your sideboard. I assume that's kind of with those depth decks in mind. Other land strategies,
lands,
something else.
depths. I mean, even if somebody's playing some kind of like 4-color control, Edgar, known for his 4-color control decks, if he decides to put a bunch of duels in his deck, I'm coming. I'm coming for him. I'm not playing around. Love me some Blood Moon. And whenever you take free wins whenever you can get them.
Yeah.
Braid makes a lot of sense. People think D&T's playable again. Artifact, 3 damage, creature. Both things you're going to want access to in the D&T matchup. And Brazen Borrower is also like very, very standoutish for the depths matchup, right? This is a card that can give you 2 potential answers to a Merit Lage, right? You have the Petty Theft, bounce it, and you can also block it with the 3/1. So there is, it gives you 2 answers for 1 card that can also be a threat for other fair matchups. Like I said, I expected some more fair matchups, so being able to up my threat count when sideboarding matters a lot. Brazen Borrower offers a lot to the sideboard for sure.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of 3/1 flash flying creatures in Vendilion Click over the years getting the job done. So getting to staple a more relevant spell than the Vendilion Click ability, especially in this depth matchups you were talking about, which have been historically shaky for Delver sometimes, is just real nice.
Yep, I agree.
All right, so more Force of Negation. We talked about that one a little bit. Forked Bolt. What's this for?
This was specifically, this is the last card I added. Originally, when I didn't have a Pyroblast in my main deck. My deck was pretty stock. I moved a Pyroblast to the main and put this card in my sideboard over it. I wanted a card that was good with Arcanist and also like sweeper-esque, that like if it can kill 2 creatures for 1 card against matchups like elves that are going wide and D&T that are going wide, that's really what I was looking for. The options are like Blazing Volley, which is just like a 1 red, deal 1 everything, or like Forked Bolt. I lean toward Forked Bolt because this deck has a critical mass of burn spells with bolts and chain lightnings that I'm going to want in all those matchups anyway. So if I can get in a spot where I'm just racing them with a Delver or something like that, I can point this Forked Bolt to the face. And that was kind of the swing vote for playing Forked Bolt over something else.
Sure, that's a big game. Hydroblast.
Yeah. Like mirror style matchups mostly. If somebody showed up with Legacy Burnt, not that bad of a choice if you're expecting a lot of Delver. Pretty bad against Oko. But like it's just like a fairly, I don't know, in my opinion, free card. I thought there was going to be more people like leaning on like Delver mirrors, especially somebody like Dylan Donoghue who has a lot of Delver experience. Like his token is the elemental token, right?
Yeah.
Like Hydroblast is one of the best cards you can have against Blue-Red Delver. And so it's just like it hedges for a lot of those matchups. Like I said, you only see 1 copy, really just trying to improve slightly a lot of my spells across a lot of matchups. So you're going to see a lot of one for that reason.
Sure. Makes a lot of sense. Another copy of Magmatic Sinkhole. Cover that one a little bit. What's Null Rod for?
Null Rod. There's not a lot of Storm experts in the room, but the matchup is horrible. Like playing against Storm is so bad that I was like, all right, I don't mind playing a Null Rod because it's such a hammer against the Storm decks, and it's still very good against Death and Taxes. Also a bad matchup for Blue-Red Delver.
Sure.
So being able to shore up by a fair bit 2 separate really bad matchups with 1 card, that's really attractive to me, even if I may not bring it in a lot, right? And other than that, it doesn't really have a lot of other utility. Like it's literally basically you're just going to see this card against just D&T and just Storm. The only thing I can imagine is like if there's a Stoneforge Mystic fair deck that plays like Astrolabe, maybe, but that's still not very good.
Yeah, that's maybe not where you want to be there. But speaking of those Fairstone Forge Mystic decks, Astrolabe things, more copies
More
of
Pyroblasts. I mean, I was talking to the competitors today. Deckless went live. I was like, I think I might not have played enough blasts. Like, I think I might should have played a third in my sideboard over something else. Like, Pyroblast is just so well set up in these tournaments, which I called by putting one in the main deck. Not adding more to my sideboard seems a little silly in hindsight, but I really didn't want to go overboard and get very punished for it playing against non-blue decks in my pod, right? So, you know, as much as it's an entire field thing, the legacy pods at the beginning of the day are only like, 4 people. So it's only a small sampling of it. And it has the potential to really punish if you try to go hard on metagaming. But I think we maybe could have slided one more in there.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense.
Very well set up.
And rounding out the sideboard, a couple copies of Surgical Extraction, kind of just covering bases there.
Yeah. Once again, card good with Arcanist. So that's actually a big swing vote for playing Surgical over something like, I don't know, like Grafdigger's Cage and just boarding out your Arcanist, right?
Sure,
like any kind of other card. Also being free matters against Blackguard Reanimator. We've seen Joe Lissette in the past. He's played Blackguard Reanimator just to like kind of try to metagame the tournament.
Collins has a top 8 with it this year.
Yeah, exactly. Collins has played it. I didn't want, basically the 2 Surgicals exist because I didn't want to cut Graveyard Hate, but I didn't want to go overboard on it either. I got paid off a little bit because I think the Lotus Box people were on Hogak, but only 2, at that point, like I want more than just 2 Surgicals, right?
Sure.
But like I said, it's such a gamble. You don't know if people are going to try to metagame by thinking everybody's going to cut Graveyard Hate for more fair cards or not. So I stuck with something that was pretty stock, which is usually 2 Surgicals, and then hope the Force of Wills pull weight. So I'm really, really glad I played the 6 total Force effects in my 75 as well as the Surgicals. I think that gives me a reasonable shot against like the Hogak decks and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you brought up Dreadhorde Arcanist. When you have all these cantrips, it's much easier to find these cards, reuse them. It's just
it makes it way better than something like Leyline because you can find it with cantrips. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, anything else that you want to touch on before we wrap up here?
No, I'm very excited, though, that I am playing Delver of Secrets in one of the last large legacy tournaments. Deck is very near and dear to my heart since I won the Open with Grixis Delver. So happy to be repping Brainstorm and Delver of Secrets in this legacy tournament.
All right. Well, congratulations on getting here.
Thank you.
He's Drake Sasser. I'm Emma Handy, and this has been a Deck Tech.